The scrapyard stretched across the barren wasteland, a graveyard of twisted metal and forgotten dreams. Kellen Rourke wiped grease off his hands with a rag that was more stain than cloth. He squinted up at the twin suns overhead and muttered to himself. It wasn't much of a life, patching up rusted hulls and scavenging scraps for the pitiful credits they brought in, but it was his life, and no one bothered him out here. Until today. The ground trembled beneath Kellen's boots, the vibrations rattling through the stacked heaps of broken starships and shattered drones. He looked up just as a sleek, glimmering alien dropship descended, its reflective surface catching the sun's light like a beacon. Kellen's jaw tightened. Visitors were rare, and they were never good news. The dropship's engines hissed as it landed, its side hatch hissing open. 3 figures emerged, clad in the polished armor of the Zrentha Syndicate, a mercenary faction notorious for their ruthlessness. At their head was a tall alien with violet skin and eyes like molten gold. He carried himself with a kind of arrogance that made Kellen's teeth grind. "You Kellen Rourke?" the alien asked, his voice smooth but laced with menace. Kellen crossed his arms. "Depends who's asking." The alien's lips curled into a sneer. "Raxtor of the Zrentha Syndicate. We're here for the Mech." Kellen raised an eyebrow. "Mech? You must have taken a wrong turn. All I've got here is junk." "Don't play coy," Raxtor snapped. "We know you've been working on something. A human mechanic doesn't order high-level fusion capacitors and quantum stabilizers without reason." Kellen's heart skipped a beat. They'd been watching him. That wasn't good, but he forced a smirk. "Even if I did have a mech, what makes you think I'd just hand it over?" Raxtor stepped closer, towering over him. "Because if you don't, we'll turn this scrapyard into a crater and leave you buried in it." Kellen's smirk didn't waver. "Fair enough. Let me show you what you're looking for." He led them deeper into the scrapyard, weaving through narrow paths lined with jagged metal. His mind raced, calculating. The mech wasn't ready, not by a long shot, but if he didn't do something fast, he'd be dead long before it ever could be. The group stopped in front of a towering hunk of cobbled-together parts, a patchwork monstrosity that looked like it had been assembled by a madman. "There she is," Kellen said, gesturing with mock pride. Raxtor's golden eyes narrowed. "That thing? You got to be joking." Kellen grinned. "Go ahead. Take a closer look." As Raxtor and his men stepped forward, Kellen slammed his fist against a hidden panel. The mech roared to life, its cobbled limbs unfolding with a screech of metal on metal. The cockpit opened, and Kellen vaulted inside, slamming it shut just as the first plasma shot ricocheted off the armor. "You've done it now," he muttered, gripping the controls. The mech systems flickered to life, barely holding together under the strain. This was no sleek military-grade machine. It was a beast born of desperation and grit, held together by duct tape, spit, and sheer willpower. The first alien charged, a hulking brute wielding an energy mace. Kellen swung the mech's arm, a jury-rigged piston driving a steel fist into the attacker's chest. The alien flew backward, crashing into a pile of scrap with a satisfying crunch. "Hold down," Kellen muttered, spinning to face the others. Raxtor shouted commands, and his remaining men opened fire. Plasma bolts and railgun slugs peppered the mech, sparks flying as the makeshift armor absorbed the hits. Kellen's hands flew over the controls, activating a crude energy shield he'd cobbled together from salvaged starship components. It flickered and sputtered, but held long enough for him to charge forward. The mech's left arm unfolded, revealing a flamethrower that spewed a torrent of fire. The aliens scattered, their polished armor blackened by the flames. Kellen's laugh was wild, almost unhinged. Not so tough now, are you?" Raxtor growled, raising a sleek alien rifle. The shot struck the mech's leg and alarms blared inside the cockpit. Kellen cursed, wrestling with the controls as the mech staggered. The leg was barely functional, a mess of salvaged servos and hydraulic pumps. But it would have to do. "You're outmatched, human," Raxtor shouted. "Surrender, and I might let you live." Kellen gritted his teeth. Not today. He yanked a lever and the mech's chest panel slid open, revealing a cluster of improvised rocket launchers. He fired, the missiles streaking toward the dropship. The explosion lit up the scrapyard, the shockwave toppling piles of metal and sending the aliens scrambling for cover. When the smoke cleared, Raxtor stood alone, his armor scorched and his rifle trembling in his hands. The mech loomed over him, sparks flying from its damaged limbs. "You think you can scare me?" Raxtor snarled. "I've faced warriors across the galaxy. You're just a man in a pile of junk." Kellen's voice crackled through the mech's speakers, low and dangerous. "That's where you're wrong. I'm a human, and if there's one thing we're good at, it's surviving." The mech's fist came down like a hammer, and Raxtor dove out of the way, barely avoiding being crushed. He rolled to his feet, aiming his rifle at the mech's exposed cockpit. Before he could fire, Kellen yanked another lever, and the mech's shoulder-mount railgun roared to life. The shot hit Raxtor square in the chest, sending him sprawling. Silence fell over the scrapyard, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal. Kellen slumped back in the cockpit, his heart pounding. The mech was barely holding together, its systems flashing red warnings across the display. But he'd won. He climbed out, standing atop the battered machine as he looked down at Raxtor's crumpled form. The alien groaned, his golden eyes dim with pain. "Tell your bosses," Kellen said, his voice cold. "This scrapyard is off limits, and if they send anyone else, they'll get the same welcome." Raxtor coughed, blood trickling from his mouth. You'll regret this." Kellen leaned closer, a grim smile on his face. "Maybe, but you won't be around to see it." With that, he climbed back into the mech, dragging its battered frame toward his workshop. There was a lot of work to do, repairs to make, systems to upgrade. The Zrentha Syndicate wouldn't take this defeat lying down, but Kellen didn't care. He'd shown them what a human could do with nothing but scraps and a stubborn refusal to quit. As the twin suns dipped below the horizon, the scrapyard mechanic turned warrior, prepared for the battles to come. The galaxy had underestimated him, and that was their first mistake.